Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us on Moneyline with Nancy. Yes, during our introduction, we've told you about the Christmas and New Year gift from the Central Bank about the new guidelines. And we have in the studio already directors from CBN to discuss this. We have Kofo Salam, Alada, the director of CPD. CBN is here. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have Musa, Jimoh, Director of Payment Systems Department of the Central Bank. Welcome, sir. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll begin with you, Mr. Alada. Let's begin. The Consumer Protection Framework was released along with the new guide to bank charges. Now, please take our viewers and indeed all of us through the highlights of the protection framework.
The Consumer Protection Regulations, CPR, actually CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, for the relationship between banks, other financial institutions, and their customers. It's pursuant to the Consumer Protection Framework issued by Central Bank in November 2016. The framework required that, banks are supposed to come up with procedure, policies for their, for consumer protection in their institutions. But these procedures and policies are supposed to be based on regulation that will be issued by Central Bank of Nigeria. So there's no better time to actually come out with this regulation than now. Because it's in tandem with the issuance of the guide to bank charges, and when you issue guide to bank charges, we've seen the use and cry that have come up with that. There is need for that assurance to be given to the consumers that, hey, where these guys are not complied with, where you have excess charges and the rest of them, what should happen? You should be protected. So quick one. The Consumer Protection Framework issued in 2016 was premised on about 9 consumer protection principles recognized universally. And the key ones are the ones that we have taken care of in the regulation just issued. Quick one, you're supposed to have legal and supervisory framework for your, that we have by virtue of Section 2 of the CBN Act, and other provisions of the BOFIA, Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act, which allows Central Bank to issue guidelines for institutions under its regulatory purview. You have other principles such as consumer complaint handling and redress. You have disclosure and transparency. You have fair treatment of consumers. You have responsible business conduct. So for us now, in the guideline that you have, then you have for data protection as well. Yes. You have for competition. You have for consumer education. But right now, we have put together about 5 of these principles in this regulation. So the regulation that we have in the market now covers fair treatment of consumers. And under this fair treatment of consumers, banks and other financial institutions are expected to take care of their customers like babies, actually. They are supposed to treat them equitably. Then they're supposed to look at this disadvantaged segment of the market. Who are these people? They are the people who are just capturing into the system. They are supposed to ensure that they consider the special needs of these people. So generally these are things which ordinarily should not even be legislated by a regulator. But what we have done is to actually put out there that where the banks are not doing this, we, in our bid to protect the customers, to keep them in the system, to ensure financial system stability, to ensure that this is done. Then for disclosure and transparency, which is the key one, this is where small prints are not allowed. We even actually insist on having a special font. It should not be less than font 10 for those who are familiar with computer. Yes. Then we expect that banks and other financial institutions should come out open and clean, show everything to the customer. Let them know everything. Even for the disadvantaged one, where somebody has an impairment, financially challenged people are supposed to be taken care of. The bank is expected to explain everything, all the terms and conditions of a product or services being offered to the customers. Now, what of the illiterate? The duty is that, yes, this thing is presented in English language, but you have to break it down to the language of the person. Where the customer displays anything, it's obvious that this person does not understand or he demands for it, the bank should listen to him. Then a key thing about, which is in sync with the guide to bank charges, yes, is what I would call the most important one. The popular thing in Nigeria, you hear this section 419. There is a section 4.1.9 in the guidelines, and especially on the chapter on disclosure and transparency, where banks are supposed to keep within the charges agreed with the customers. And remember also that these charges that are to be agreed with the customers should be in line with the newly released guide to bank charges. So if you do not even know any particular section of this regulation, remember section 419, you know, and that's you are supposed to watch out. And if there's going to be any variation in all this, banks are supposed to give notification to the customers, you know, before anything falls in. Because interest rate, we do not, you know, legislate on it specifically. It varies. Even though we have base and all that, most of these are tied to the MPR and the rest of it. You know, then we look at the guideline on responsible business conduct. This one covers how do you do your daily transaction with your customer, that is the banks, you know. And we have sections on sales promotion there. We have the one on advertisement. And for advertisement, we expect advertisement to be very, very factual. You know, we don't want advertisement to just be talking about the benefits of a product and service. You're supposed to also alert your customers about the risk elements on all that. Then you are expected under this particular chapter also to look at the status of the person if you want to do any lending, because we have a subsection here on responsible lending. So when you want to do lending, and also this is becoming very, very important now that banks are mandated to create credit, you know, following the stipulation by Central Bank of what should be the loan to deposit ratio. So you are to look at the status of this person, consider his ability to pay, in addition to the other statutory requirement of your checking the credit bureau, you know, and the CBN credit risk management system for the credit history of this particular customer. So these are some of the things that we have had. And lastly, and most importantly, maybe we'll still be talking about it later, is the chapter on complaints handling and redress. So if all these fail, if there's a failure on the part of a bank or other financial institution, you know, then how do we take care of the complaints? So that one is in the chapter on complaint handling and redress. You know, so these are some of the highlights, you know, that we need to point out. But we also commend people to actually look into this, read it, you know, so that when you walk into your bank, you are well armed with your rights.
Now, I'll come to you, Mr. Jimoh. Why Nigerians are still digesting Section 419 and the Christmas gifts from Central Bank? What informed the decision of the Central Bank to review and get this material at this time now?
Okay, thank you very much. I don't think there will be a better time to give these end-of-year largesse to Nigerians. Basically, I think the overarching objective is basically to incentivize the users of electronic payment to begin to adopt electronic payment and encourage the usage of all the acceptance channel. There have been complaints from the public, so we listen to the feedback. We also listen to the operators, the institutions, the banks, and the fintech that provide all these devices that are used to conduct electronic transaction. We also listen to the merchants, so it's a holistic ecosystem discussion to see what we can do to balance the equation so that it will be a win-win. And at the end of the day, looking at the volume of transactions that we have recorded between 2007 and 2009, it is time to bring down the price so that we can bring in more people within the ecosystem to get included. And as we used to say, volume is the name of the game. The more people you have, the better for you. So that's why all these considerations, you know, came to bear at this point in time.
Still staying with you now, Nigerians will say we want to hear from the horse's mouth. Now, what are some of those charges that have been slashed so far?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me start with the ATM, because that's a popular one. We've moved from 65 naira to 35 naira. And prior to this time, it used to be 100 naira. There was a time when it was 100 naira, and we moved to 65 naira. And because we really want to get people more included, we want people to use the ATM, you know, to conduct transactions, not just for cash withdrawal. There are other transactions that you can actually do on ATM. We need to incentivize people, and we thought that the 69 naira was a disincentive for people to use the ATM, and so we're bringing it down to 35 naira. And also hoping that with this, people will be more encouraged to go and do ATM transactions, pay their bills, and conduct other electronic transactions. So ATM 65 naira now to 35 naira. But this is when you use other banks' ATM. If you go to your own bank, you will not pay any fee for using the ATM. So technically, it's actually an avoidable cost. If you do not want to pay this fee, just go to your bank, and no bank will charge you for using their ATM to make withdrawals and conduct other electronic transactions. That's one. We also look at the card maintenance fee. You know, a lot of people had actually called us and said, look, the card you have given me, I have it in my pocket and I secure it. So what are you maintaining banks that you're charging me for?
Yes.
So we've reduced the card maintenance fee from 600 naira per annum, which used to be 50 naira every month, to now 50 naira every quarter, 200. So it's now 600 to 200 naira. That's also a major one. We also looked at some of the other charges which have to do with when transfers are done. When you do an interbank transfer, this is interbank, not within your bank. If you do, you know, a transfer within your bank, you don't incur any charge. But if you do across banks, you need to pay for the infrastructure and for the service. It used to be 50 naira, you know, across board, regardless of the transaction amount. But because we want to incentivize micropayment for people who are doing small payments, we have now put them in strata. So you have for transactions up to 5,000 naira, you just pay 10 naira. You don't have to pay the 50 naira. So people can actually be incentivized to use USSD, use their phone to make payment because the cost is very low. And then between 5,000, you know, to 50,000, you pay 25. And then above 50,000, you pay the regular 50. So this again has encouraged, because more people actually do transactions below 5,000 naira. I want to pay for fuel. I want to pay at a restaurant for you know, meat pie, bread and all that. So micropayment is huge, and this will actually incentivize a lot of people to do more electronic payment than to pay with cash. So you have that. And we also talked about merchant acquiring. Okay, merchants are incentivized to encourage the adoption of electronic payment. You know, prior to this time, you go to some business outfit, hotel, you know, shops, and they tell you that the POS terminal is not working. Why? Because actually when transactions happen, they don't get 100% of the transaction amount. It is discounted. We call it merchant discount fee that they pay, which is the cost to the bank for providing the electronic, you know, infrastructure for acquiring that. We moved it from 0.75%, which was capped at 1,200, which means you can't pay more than 1,200, to now 0.5, capped at 1,000. So that has also incentivized the merchant to say, look, I'd rather do more with electronic transactions than to receive cash, which I know I'll pay heavily for in terms of managing the cash and all that. So a whole compendium of some of the changes in the guide to bank charge, but these are the major ones that I know will attract the public's attention. That
is good. And now coming to you, Mr. Alada, now we've seen, how does this particular consumer protection framework sync with the financial inclusion plan and drive of the central bank?
I would say, first, financial inclusion is being driven by the central bank. You know, and remember, even from the 80% inclusion target of 2020, the governor in his 5-year plan actually is already setting the bar, you know, to up to 95% inclusion by 2024. You know, so how can we achieve this? Like I indicated earlier on, yes, you're asking people to come in. The assurance should be available, you know, for the targets, you know, that when I come in, I should be taken care of. Specifically, if you look at our provisions on fair treatment of consumers, so we have said that banks will need to consider especially the needs, you know, of certain people, you know, financially excluded, you know, that you are just bringing in. And also look at what we have done on the guide to bank charges. You'll see that it is the lower segment of the market, you know, that you are now you have lowered most of their things. And let me quickly mention that even records have shown that between 2012 and 2018, 61% of e-transaction or especially POS transaction are below 10,000 naira.
Yes.
You know, and also maybe the fiscal authority actually even factored this one in now raising the bar, you know, for the threshold for transaction that will attract stamp duty, 15 naira stamp duty, to 10,000 naira from 1,000 naira. So what we're expecting is that for the artisans out there that we're trying to capture into the financial ecosystem, we're already preparing for them. You know, so it is because what is scary for anybody who's here to have a bank account, or anybody who's here to do insurance or any other financial services will be the fact that if I come in there, what's the need for me? What are the things? So apart from your regular savings that may attract interest, you now have access to finance. So these are some things that I want to ensure by saying, banks, it is now mandatory for you to do X, Y, Z. Things that would ordinarily would have left to business decision and rest of it. Though, let it be known that CBN will not intervene in certain business decision about how much waiver you can give to your customer and all that. But it is for us to let the customer be aware that where you have issues, these are your expectations from your bank. And in our drive for financial inclusion, we put this out there. So if there are no documents, no regulations, to give these people assurances, then you are not going to have some of this. And that is why the institutions to which these regulations apply have been clearly defined in the regulations to include agents, service providers, the lowest echelon of banking services in Nigeria is also captured. Just at the payment service providers, the payment service banks that we're expecting to go come alive in 2020 or beyond, so many of them. So anybody who holds a license of Central Bank of Nigeria is captured. And again, what we have also done, the scope of the regulations clearly states that banks and other financial institutions, and banks under this under central bank purview are supposed to ensure that in their agreement or any contract with persons or organizations not otherwise regulated by Central Bank of Nigeria, they are supposed to make it by referencing, what lawyers will say cross-referencing. They're supposed to reference this particular document in any contract with them, so that we don't have, at the end of the day, you have third-party services being provided by somebody. I will now say, I can treat consumers anyhow. No. So we have taken care of that here. It's the duty of the person who is the driver, that is the person who regulated, to ensure that these are there. So the expectation is that people out there who are here to come in should not have any fear anymore, because they are getting the assurances that their interests are protected. Yes. The banks too actually know that the better they treat customers, the better it is for their bottom line. And what are we looking at? Let's just mention here that, you see, if you are talking of charges, we're expecting that there should be added value. Yes, now you have value so high there in terms of charges. Now that it's dropped, so if you spread it, if you have more customers captured, then at the end of the day, it will still be a positive bottom line for the banks and other financial institutions. Yeah, you may have some what's called at the beginning, but what we are now doing is that go out there as banks, market people, capture people into the system. So we should be at par with other nations in terms of financial inclusion, and they will copy from us, as they are already doing now anyway. Nigeria is ahead. Yes.
Mr. Jimoh, let me come to you now. Can you clarify the issue around the POS charges? Now, there are reports that the business is supposed to bear the cost of a customer using a POS. Can you clarify the issues around that? What is obtainable in terms of charges for POS usage? Okay,
I know where you are going, and maybe I should put the question straight. The 15 naira stamp duty charge, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. No customers are not expected to pay any fee, any surcharge when you use your card at a merchant outlet. Yeah, you don't pay anything. It is expected that the merchant who collects the fee into its account should pay. Today, if you receive a credit into your account, and that account is not a savings account, and the transaction amount is more than 1,000 naira, there is a stamp duty of 15 naira to be paid, even as an individual. Same thing to corporate accounts, the merchant accounts. Every time we go to their outlets to buy goods and services, we pay them on individual basis, right? But the settlement system that we have in this country is such that the entire fee is not given to them until the following day, because we need to aggregate all the collections and pay them T+1, right? So when the fee is now aggregated together, so at the end of the day, you could have a merchant that have done a total sale of like 20 million. You don't see every single payment as a credit line to its account. It comes aggregated. When that money goes into the account, what happens today is that on that 20 million naira, he or she pays 50 naira. Okay. Against what would have happened to, I bought 2,000, you bought 3,000, so every transaction was supposed to. So a larger degree, the government was being shortchanged of the stamp duty. And that was exactly what we have told the banks, to be more responsible in terms of monitoring the transactions that go to merchant account and saying, unbundle it, rather than take it there as a whole, unbundle it, and treat each transaction as if a customer was paying directly to the merchant's account, and check if the transaction is dutiable, if there is stamp duty to be paid on. This was the explanation we gave to our banks and to be communicated to the merchants. Unfortunately, the merchants misunderstood it. I want to imagine that they misunderstood it, and what they did was to transfer that fee to customers. If you go to merchant outlets today and you pay with cash, they will tell you that you won't pay. When you pay with electronic, they charge you. So it's actually a misrepresentation. No single Nigerian should pay any surcharge or 15 naira or whatever amount for using your card at a merchant outlet. The merchant should pay. And it has to be very clear that it's the merchant who actually pays. Not just stamp duty, all taxes that a merchant should be paid to the government. So CBN's role here is not about regulating stamp duty because it's an act.
Yes.
It's not our fee. It's about making sure that the entities that we regulate, the banks, are more aware of their responsibility and ensure that no single kobo is left uncollected for the government. That's basically it. So, final statement, no consumer should pay this 15 naira fee.
Okay, still staying with you, Mr. Jimoh. As commendable as the move is now, what measures is the central bank putting in place to ensure compliance to these reviews, that's so far?
You know, and that's why I said the institutions that we regulate, so we have power over them. And banks have been very compliant in terms of directives. They will not fail. They know that when we give directives, we mean it. And it's actually a CBN, a new CBN that in all discussions, we usually engage our banks and other stakeholders before arriving at certain decisions. So we are all in it. I'm sure they will comply. If, however, they default, there's a penalty of 2 million naira for every single default. Once you default in not either giving the government its money or not, ensuring that the merchant behaves very well, once there is a default, you pay, the CBN will debit your account for 2 million naira. And for the number of days on daily basis that infraction still remains untreated, you continue to pay 2 million naira. So it's very huge. It's deterrent enough for every bank to behave well and ensure that the merchants and all other, ecosystem participants, behave well. So I believe that the penalty that will be imposed on banks will actually deter them from defaulting.
Let me come to the director of the CPD now. Issues around Nigerians want to know, where are we going to complain to? Where should Nigerians go in a situation where there are complaints? What are the mechanisms put in place to ensure that in the event of service failure, what are the complaint mechanisms that have been put in place by the central bank to address that?
Yes, you recall that earlier in January this year, central bank actually came up with a new system known as Consumer Complaint Management System. This is one of the ways. But we want to put it out there that the primary and the first level of complaint should be to the service provider, the banks or other financial institutions that you have complaint against. So walk in there, if you can walk in or do telephone calls to your bank, submit your complaint to the bank. The bank is mandated to actually respond to you with 24 hours, acknowledging the fact that you have lodged this particular report and issue a special number we call a unique identifier, for the complaint. Because this is what will be uploaded, when they are now uploading the complaint onto the CCMS, which they have to do daily, this number will be used. And the customer too can use that number in his correspondence with Central Bank of Nigeria. So we already have service level agreement or timelines agreement with the banks that XY type of complaint should be dealt with within this particular period. So if a bank does not do that, it attracts sanctions, for the customer. So the guidelines, the regulation we have issued now, in chapter 6 of it is actually consumer handling and redress, consumer complaint handling and redress. And specifically we have detailed it there, how a bank is supposed to have an internal dispute resolution system, and on this system, you go through all the levels and all that. So when a decision is made by the bank, if it's acceptable to the customer, that is the end of it. But if it's not satisfied, it's entitled to a second level review by another set of people within the bank. So where that fails, it can now come to central bank, because we have criteria, that's eligibility criteria for central bank to come into handling any complaint. So in addition to that, something that we have also put in place in this is the fact that banks are supposed to even do root cause analysis of complaints, so that this will help them in putting steps in place to prevent these complaints from happening. Meanwhile, let's just even tell the world there that for the umpteenth time, when you have issues like this and you want to report to central bank, you have CPD, you can send email to cpd@cbn.gov.ng. Yes. You do that, then when our CCMS also comes out with public portal in year 2020, you'll be able to also get across to CBN via on web-based and all of that.
And so we also have telephone line for those who don't have access.
Yes, for telephone lines, all those ones we put out there for our people so they can use telephone line to call the contact center of Central Bank and lodge their complaint.
Before we leave, I want to ask, how accessible is the framework? How accessible is it?
Well,
to
it
the
is
public?
actually there on the CBN website. That's number one. Then, because this is being gazetted as well, and we intend to actually make it very, very available, because CBN intends to put this in print, bound volume, and give out there during CBN fairs and any stakeholder interaction that we carry out with the people.
Thank you
Mr.
so
Jimoh?
much. Thank you so much. It's been an interesting and quite insightful conversation we'll be having. But as the much you can take the time, once it's 1 hour time, everything moves fast, especially when the conversations is interesting and what Nigerians are keening into. But as the much you can take today, and thank you so much for being part of the program. It's very insightful. We'll be speaking with Musa, Jimoh, the Director of Payment System from the Department of Central Bank. He has been giving us his based on the new framework. And we've also been speaking to Kofo, Salam, Alada, the Director of CPD at CBN. Thank you so much for being part of the show.
It's a pleasure.
Yes, and to Nigerians, we're wishing you Merry Christmas in advance. I'm Henry Esomchi.
And I am Christaina Amodu. Happy holidays.